Wallis Simpson was not the first woman in Edward VIII's life. Before Wallis, there were 3 other women, one of whom he nearly got married to. Rosemary Levison Gower, daughter of the Dowager Duchess of Sutherland, was an English rose, high-born, high-spirited, good, kind, charitable, and beautiful. Edward first met her when she was working as a nurse in France in 1917, in a Red Cross hospital set up by her mother, and he was visiting, age 23, with his parents. He was completely smitten by this beautiful, charming, and sympathetic girl. Before long, it became evident that he was crazily in love with her and began courting her. This was in the dawn of the era when it was becoming acceptable for a royal prince to marry a commoner rather than being forced to marry a foreign princess. Edward proposed, Rosemary accepted. She would have made an excellent 20th century queen, a woman with a strong social conscience, trained to do charitable work through a childhood of helping her mother, Millicent. Although the king liked Rosemary immensely, he simply couldn't sanction the idea of her eventually being queen, because of her family members. The first of these was her mother. Millicent, the Duchess, had been widowed and had shocked society shortly afterwards by remarrying. It seemed like indecent haste. Worse, that marriage did not last and she was divorced. But even more scandal was to follow when she married again, to a known homosexual. Another divorce followed soon after the marriage took place. The king, as the head of the Church of England, was doubtful that the future queen should be the daughter of an oft-married, oft-kiversed woman. But Millicent's brother was yet another factor. He was the 5th Earl of Rosslyn who, when he had inherited the earldom, embarked on a gambling spree, one that lasted for 36 years. The Earl of Rosslyn himself was not involved in drink or drugs, but was a well-known and rather disreputable character. The king could imagine that his exploits, and those of his sister, were enough to prevent Rosemary from marrying the Prince of Wales and ultimately becoming the Queen of England. Little did the king know that Rosemary would be the last aristocratic single girl Edward would ever seriously consider as a possible wife, and that he would go on to marry not the daughter of a divorcee, but a twice-divorced American. Rosemary was a woman who could have changed history. Had Edward married her, there would have been no Wallis and no abdication. When it became apparent that the king wasn't going to allow her to marry Edward, Rosemary promptly married one of Edward's friends, Eric, Viscount Ednam. On July 21, 1930, the plane she was traveling in disintegrated in midair near a small Kent village. Rosemary's remains were found in an orchard, and the body of the young woman who could have been the Queen of England was identified only by her string of pearls. Edward had never forgotten her, and was shocked when he heard the news. Thelma Furness, one of the prince's later mistresses, recalled that on hearing of Rosemary's death, the prince cried for the only time that she ever saw. The following year, he opened the Rosemary Ednam Memorial Extension at the Royal Northern Hospital at Stoke-on-Trent. Winifred May Birkin, better known as Frida Dudley Ward, was born on 28 July 1894 as the eldest of 3 daughters and one son of Charles Wilfred Birkin and Claire Lloyd Birkin. Frida's first husband was William Dudley Ward, and they married on 9 July 1913. They had 2 daughters together. They met in March 1918 during a chance encounter. At the time, she was already disenchanted with her marriage, and she was out for the evening with a friend when she was caught up in a Zeppelin raid. As the air alarm sounded, Frida sought refuge in the doorway of a house in Belgrave Square. There was a party going on inside, and the hostess invited Frida inside. Inside the cellar where the guests had taken shelter, she met the Prince of Wales. When the air raid was over, the party continued upstairs. The relationship developed quickly after that, and they were soon the talk of society. He was passionately in love with her, and when they were not together, he would call her 4 or 5 times a night. When writing to her, he called her "my angel" and signed with "tons and tons of love from your E." But Freda and Edward knew where they stood. They would never be able to marry, even if they had wanted to, but it didn't matter. He soon opened up to her about everything. Edward soon moved out of Buckingham Palace and into York House, part of St. James's Palace, and Freda helped him to turn it into something livable. In 1919, Freda herself moved to a house in Cumberland Terrace, and they would spend more time there than at York House. It seemed that Freda's husband was accepting of the situation, and they increasingly began to lead separate lives. She did remain a fully devoted mother to her 2 young daughters. Edward genuinely came to care for them as well, and he wrote to a friend, "I am so fond of those 2 babies, and they are so sweet to me, and we all have such fun together, sometimes the 4 of us." The girls took to calling him Little Prince. When the relationship became more well-known to the outside world, Freda tried to break it off, fearing for her reputation and that of her daughters. He would have none of it, and almost had a breakdown while on tour. Afterwards, he became even more dependent on her than before. Like with Wallis later, it would appear that he was more in love with her than she was with him. She also had an affair with a wealthy banker named Michael Herbert during most of their relationship, as Edward was away a lot, and it was rumored that Edward had flings of his own too, including with Freda's sister Vera. The letters he wrote to her show a need to be dominated by women. For example, "You know you ought to be really foul to me sometimes, sweetie, and curse and be cruel. It would do me worlds of good and bring me to my right senses. I think I'm the kind of man who needs a certain amount of cruelty without which he gets abominably spoilt and soft. I feel that's what's the matter with me." With a more sexual background, he wrote, "I do need you so badly to chase me into bed with a big stick." The relationship between Freda and Edward lasted until both Thelma, Viscountess Furness, and Wallis Simpson appeared on the scene. Edward was seen dancing with Freda as late as February 1934, but by then, Wallis was rising in the ranks. He visited Freda less and less, and she did not realize she had not heard from him for a while, until after her eldest daughter had recovered from appendicitis. The end of their relationship was brutal. Freda called St. James's Palace and was told, "I have orders not to put you through." They never spoke again. Thelma, Viscountess Furness, was born on 23rd of August 1904, and had a twin sister named Gloria, who was the mother of renowned socialite Gloria Vanderbilt. Thelma firstly married James Vale Converse, 10 years her senior, in 1922, but they divorced in 1925. Her second husband was Marmaduke Furness, first Viscount Furness, the chairman of Furness Shipping Company. They were married in 1926 and had 1 son, William Anthony Furness. There are several stories going around as to when Thelma and the Prince of Wales really met. Marmaduke reportedly doubted that Anthony was really his son, but Thelma would not have wanted to have his legitimacy doubted, as he would eventually inherit the Furness title. Thelma first met the prince at a ball at Londonderry House in 1926, but they didn't meet again until the Leicestershire Agricultural Show on 14 June 1929. He asked her to dine, and they met regularly until she joined him on safari in East Africa early in 1930, when a closer relationship developed. On the prince's return to England in April 1930, she was his regular weekend companion at his newly acquired Fort Belvedere until January 1934. She also entertained the prince at her London home, in Primrose Hill, and the Furness country house, Borough Court. However, it was at Borough Court on 10 January 1931 that she introduced the prince to her close friend, fellow American Wallis Simpson. Inadvisedly, in January 1934, Thelma went off to New York to stay a couple of months with her sister and dropped a note to Wallis to look after the little man while she was away. Too late, she discovered on her return just how well Wallis had been looking after him.